Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Welcome to Learn Arabic from the Quran, Lesson 8, Broken Plurals. Let's get started. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. So we are going to talk about broken plurals, irregular plurals. So it is best understood with taking an example. We will look at this word, talibun, to understand broken plurals. So the word will undergo some changes in order to form the broken plural. We talked about in English with the example last time. We said goose, geese. So the spelling of the word has changed. It's not as simple as adding an S to the end. It has underwent some changes to make the plural from goose to geese. Similarly, over here, we began with observing some changes. For example, here, the word has a fatha, ta-le-bun. But let's observe the changes that happen. First of all, this fatha is now a dhamma. So it's tulab. We also observe the double sounding on the lam. There are two lams. Here there was one lam, and now there's two lams. Tulab. And the other thing is there's an alif after the lam. There's no alif here. There's an alif after the lam. This was a kasra. Here there's a fatha on the lam. So try to hear the sound of the plural also. Tulab. Talibun, tulab. As we will study later, these plurals follow certain patterns, which we will begin to recognize. So some words have a second plural, which is not as common, but sometimes a word will have two plurals. And as we will study later, this is another pattern of a plural, which is, it has a ta marbuta at the end, which is normally a sign of feminine, but you will be able to recognize that it follows a pattern of plural, broken plural. And that's why you will recognize that this is a plural. So talabatun is a second plural for talibun, not as commonly used as tulab. This one has also undergone changes. If you observe from the original, it has undergone changes. There's no alif after the ta, and a ta marbuta has been added to the end of it. So this is the idea of broken plurals, where they undergo certain changes in either the vowels, the letters, prefixes are added, etc. So in this beautiful Quranic verse, we see a couple of plurals here. For akalamun, the singular is qalamun. Qalamun is the singular, and the plural is aqlamun. Okay, and then we see another plural here, abhur, for seas, plural. And bahrun is the singular. Okay, it's also used here, singular, for sea. So both in this verse, we observe both the singular and the plural of this word. And it follows a different pattern as we will study. Aqlam is one pattern and abhur is another pattern. Okay, and this word kalimatun, do you recognize this? This is the sound feminine plural that we studied last time. So the singular would be kalimatun. Kalimatun, and then it became a sound feminine plural by the addition of this alif and ta, maftuha. Okay, we studied about this in the last class. Now we're going to talk about patterns. As I mentioned before, broken plurals, they have certain patterns. If you kind of know these patterns, you will at least be able to recognize the plurals in a verse. Okay, so why are these patterns given in this form? Fa'ala, fi'alun, fu'ulun. The reason is because this is considered like a standard. Okay, the letters fa, ain, lam are considered standard 3-letter root words. And you can make patterns with this. So for example, let's take this, fu'ulun. So this pattern contains 3 root letters, fa, ain, and lam. To this root letter, we have added the waw. And we've put dhammas on the fa and the ain. There's dhamma, and then there's a waw added to make this pattern. But these are the 3 root letters. Fa'ala, fu'ulun. So similarly, this word, qa'idun, means sitting, right? So the root letters here are qaf, ain, and dal. So how do we make the plural of this pattern? So what you're doing is you're also just adding this waw, and you're adding these dhammas, okay, to make this pattern. Fu'ulun. Okay, so it's qu'udun. Qu'udun. Similar to this pattern. Fu'ulun, qu'udun means sitting, which is the plural. So similarly, jalisun means sitting. So we observe the letters, the root letters are jim, lam, and sin. How do you make the plural? So you put the dhamma on the first 2 letters, and then here is the waw that is added. Julusun. So the best way to remember these patterns is to sound it out. See? Julusun, you hear this waw and the dhammas, you hear it. Julusun, fu'ulun. Okay, so I hope you can hear that, like in this Quranic verse. Qu'udan, junubahim. So the word is junub. Junub is the plural. Jump, junub. It's in this pattern. Okay, julus is in this hadith. All right, so here's another pattern, again given to you in this fa'ain lam format, but notice here there's a kasra, fi'alun, and there's a alif after the ain, fi'alun. So sound it out with this word. The word is singular is na'imun, na'imatun, sleeping. And what is the plural? Niyamun. Niyamun. Okay, so the plural of qa'imun, qa'imatun is qiyamun. Qiyamun, standing. So it follows this pattern here, right? Fi'alun, you sound it out. Qiyamun, niyamun. So you're following this pattern here of fi'alun. So far we looked at these 2 patterns, fi'alun, fu'ulun. We're going to look at more patterns as we go through today. All right, so here's another pattern, fu'ulun. So look at this word, kaf, taba, kutubun. This is the pattern of the plural. Kitabun is the singular, plural is kutubun. Singular is rasulun, singular is rasulun, plural is rusulun. Following this pattern, rusulun, messengers. Okay, we already looked at this pattern in the last slide. So here is najmun, star, and plural is nujumun. We talked about this. Sound it out. Nujumun, shaykhun, shuyukhun. Here are 2 more patterns. Fi'alun, so jabalun, jibalun. Rajulun, rijalun. It's following this plural pattern. So this is another one. Fu'alun, so tajirun, tujarun. You can hear the doubling here. Tujarun, talibun, tulabun. We looked at this in the first slide, this example. So here it tells you this is the key, right? The fa, ain, and the lam. And then there's some changes that it goes through in this format, in this pattern. And the plurals are formed on this pattern. So you don't necessarily always have to memorize everything, but you can always start to recognize them. It will sound to you like a plural. So here are more. Afa'alun, this pattern. See, waladun, awladun, with the hamza in the beginning. Awladun. It follows this pattern. Again, sound it out. Afa'alun, awladun. Ammun, a'mamun. Here's another one. Af'ila'u. So, sadiqun, asdiqa'u. Tabibun, atibba'u. Okay, so here, don't worry about this too much. What happens is tabibun, if you follow this pattern right here, exactly this pattern, the sound would be biba'u. But the Arabs said this does not quite sound right. It's a little bit difficult to pronounce. So they just underwent some changes. To this sounds, it's easier to pronounce. So they just say atiba'u. So you don't have to worry. You don't have to come up with these. You just have to know that tabibun, the plural is atiba'u, and it follows this pattern. Atiba'u. You still will be able to recognize this pattern. So akhun, ikhwatun. Again, a plural with a ta marbuta pattern. This is a plural with a ta marbuta pattern, okay? Ikhwatun. So fatan, fityatun. Young men. Fityatun. It follows this pattern. Okay. So zamilun is another, this is another pattern. Zumala'u. Hear this. Fu'ala'u. Okay. Colleagues. Faqirun. You're all familiar with this. Faqirun. What is the plural of that? Fuqara'u. It follows this pattern. Okay. So these patterns are diptotes. We'll talk about this a little bit later. We studied in the previous lesson what is a diptose. Some of these plural patterns are diptotes. We will study about this a few slides later. Okay, so what we look here is more patterns. So this is why these are the patterns with the ta marbuta and the end. Okay, this is another pattern. Fa'alatun. I mentioned this in the beginning. Talibun, student, has another plural which follows this pattern. Talabatun. So this is how you recognize that it's a plural. Talabatun, it follows this pattern. So kafirun, kafaratun is the plural. Okay, it follows this pattern right here. Fa'alatun. Here's another pattern, fu'alun. So a very common example is suratun, which means a surah. And what is the plural? It follows this pattern. Look, suwarun, suwarun. It follows this pattern here. If you observe, it has a dhamma in the first letter, a fatha in the second letter, and then a tanween on the last letter, su'arun. Okay, suratun, su'arun. Please observe these pronunciations because I gave you this little chart here to show you that if you change the fatha, dhamma, kasra, the meaning changes, right, over here. So that's why it's important to pronounce these things correctly. Okay, so this is spelling of this word is different than the spelling of this word for bracelet, right? So we observe that there is a fatha here, suwarun, versus surun, right? So you have to realize that it follows this pattern, and this is a plural of this word, okay? Another example is this one. The singular is gurfatun, which means a room, and the plural is gurafun, rooms, right? So here's another one, nuskhatun, plural is nusakhun, copies. So these are some examples of these. So we learned two more new patterns here. This one, fa'alatun and fu'alun, with some examples. So let's talk about broken plurals. The Arabic word for that is jam'ut taksir. Taksir means broken. Okay, so there are certain plurals that will be mamnu'u min as-sarf. What does that mean? Diptote. We talked about diptote in a prior lesson. I believe it was in the gender lesson. At the end of that, we talked briefly about diptote, where they do not have nunation. What does that mean? They don't take a tanween. These are kind of a little bit different in this pronunciation because they're not going to accept a tanween. Okay, and then for the mansub case and for the majroor case, they're always going to take a fatha. We said they're kind of a little bit stubborn. We talked about that in that lesson. They always want to take a fatha. Even in the genitive case, they're going to take a fatha. Okay, so let's take some examples here. So agniya, so you're not going to say agniya un. that would be incorrect because it doesn't take a tanween. So fuqara'u, masajidu, it follows this pattern. Mafa'ilu. And then another one in here is mafa'ilu. It has a ya here. So manadilu, which means handkerchiefs. Manadilu. Okay. So asdiqa'u, zumala'u, fanadiku, mafatihu, azkiya'u, ulama'u, daqa'iku, fanajinu. Coffee cups. So I hope you just recognize the sound. You're not expected to memorize everything, just to recognize that the plurals are coming in these patterns right here on over here. These are the patterns. Okay. So if you observe carefully, these words have this pattern. These three words over here follow this pattern of ila'u. These ones will follow this pattern. For ala'u, it will sound like that. And then these ones, masajidu, will follow this one. Mafa'ilu, right? And then these words follow this pattern. Mafa'ilu. It's the exact same one as this one, except it has a ya here. So again, this is a lot of patterns. You're not expected to memorize everything, just expected to kind of recognize them. Just that these are plurals. If you see these kind of words, you would kind of begin to recognize that they are plurals, broken plurals. So now we are just going to go through a summary of the patterns that we kind of went over. There are more than 20 patterns of the broken plurals. We're just going through some of them so that you're able to recognize them in the Quran. So we talked about these. It's just a recap, a review of what we did. So Najmun, we said, was a star. It follows, the plural follows. Fu'ulun, nujumun. I would encourage you to please hear the sounds as I say them out loud. So kitabun, kutubun. It follows fu'ulun. Jabalun, mountain. Jibalun. It sounds like fi'alun. Tajirun is a merchant. The plural is tujarun, following fu'alun. Okay, so then qalamun, aqlamun follows this pattern. Okay, zamilun, zumala'u. Okay, akhun, ikhwatun. We talked about these, a few plurals that have a ta marbuta at the end. So here are some more plurals that you can kind of go over on your own because they are giving you examples of this pattern. There's a lot of examples of the plurals of this pattern that we talked about today. So qalamun, aqlamun, and there's more for you to go over. As you sound them out aloud, you will be able to recognize these plurals in the Quran. So yawmun, ayyamun, you should read them out aloud so that you can recognize them when they come in the Quran. Okay, so ibnun, abna'un. So right here, this gives you an example of this pattern. So aqlamun, we looked at this verse earlier. And then we talked about fi'al pattern, and here are some common words in that pattern. Rijalun, ibadun, kibarun, sigarun. Very important words here, right, for you to go over. Nisa'un. So these are important, are good words for you to review. Okay. So here's ibad in this verse. It's a plural, meaning slaves. All right. So now let's look at broken plural pattern over here. Sigarun. This is just pointing out to you that most adjectives that we will study later will come in this pattern. Saghirun. Adjectives will come in this pattern, and these adjectives will have two kinds of plural. One will be in the sound masculine plurals that we looked at earlier, saghirun, with the waw noon, and another pattern will be in this form, in this fi'al pattern. So sigarun. Okay. used for both humans and non-humans. Sigarun. So again, this will be, we looked at these before, these two patterns. So ra'isun, ru'asa'u, right? Qadimun, qudama'u. And then madaris is plural of madrasatun. Makatib. So they follow these patterns. You can sound them out. They follow these patterns here. And then from the Quranic example, we looked at this, of this pattern. Ulama'u, the scholars. Again, this one also we looked at earlier for ul. So kutubun, so kitabun, kutubun, jadidun, jududun, madinatun, mudunun. Okay, here's another kind. Baitun, buyutun, shuhurun, fusulun. Okay, so you begin to recognize these as broken plurals. So right here, shahrun, and shuhurun. Okay, so here's more examples. These are not as common. So kursiyun, karasin, karasi. So ardun, aradin. So this is a list of plurals. If you have time, you can go through them and try to memorize some of these broken plurals, or at least sound them out so that you get familiar with that. This is something you can kind of go over on your own. Now we're going to jump on to the other book to go over some examples of broken plurals from the Quran. All right, so let's look at some broken plurals. So again, the definition is given here. Unlike sound plurals, where the original form of the word is retained, the broken plural is formed by making internal changes to the structure, as we talked about. So again, examples from the Quran is given here. So the singular is kitabun. We talked about duals in the last class. We added alif and nun, kitaban. And here the plural is kutubun. We talked about these patterns. So, and then it's also showing you the accusative and the genitive. So kutuban, kutubin. We talked about accusative and genitive of the duals in the last lesson. Kitabaini. They are going to be the same. Okay. So again, waladun, the plural is awladun. We talked about patterns in the lesson, but here it's just giving them to you. It's not going over the patterns, but it helps for you to know them, that the pattern is the pattern. So amarun, umurun, right? So rabbun, arbabun. So you can go through these on your own. So these are some plurals given here. Malun, amwalun, right? So we talked about this one. This comes very often in the Quran, nahrun, anharun, and here it has a second plural also. But this is more common, anharun. Shahrun, shuhurun. This is the more common plural, but it has a second one that's given to you. So zawjun, azwajun. So madinatun, mudunun. Okay. So here's some more for you. Saifun is a sword, and then suyufun, jabalun, jibalun, baitun, buyutun. So a woman, look here, it has two plurals. So imra'atun, this one is the common one, nisa'un, the common plural that we're all used to. But here's a second plural that's also not as common, niswatun. So this is also a common one that you should know, rajulun, rijalun. Okay, so here are some examples of verses using plurals. Watilkal ayyam, so this is days. Yawmun is the singular, plural is ayyam, days. Okay, so Jannat should not be underlined. It's not a broken plural. It's actually a sound feminine plural, because the singular is, we studied in another class, Jannatun. So this is a sound feminine plural because it's adding the alif and the ta. It's following that pattern. So this is not a broken plural. Now this one is anhar. We just looked at that earlier. Nahrun and harun. Okay, so we also looked at this, arbab a little bit earlier. So we looked at these jibal, jibal, jabalun, jibalun. So qalbun is heart, and this is plural. Qulub, qulubun. It's following certain patterns that we looked at. Nisa'u, right? Azwaj, we looked at that before. Awlad. So rusul. We talked about rusul as a plural, messengers. All right. And then we looked at this too, baitun, and then this is plural, buyut, buyut. So I would suggest that you go over the plural patterns again. I know there's a lot of them, but the main idea is for you not to memorize everything, but as I hope you can at least recognize them, that this is a plural word when you read them in the Quran. Like, for example, if you see rasulun, you know that's singular, but if you see rusul in the Quran, you would know that this is plural. So you would know this is a plural. Baitun, buyut, buyut. So I hope you're able to recognize some of them, like waladun, awladun. Okay. So that's the end of this class. I hope you benefited from this class, and I will see you, inshallah, next time. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.